let's talk today a little bit about church shootings. As you know, there have been quite a few of those over the last couple of decades. As a matter of fact, the church shooting at Wedgwood Baptist Church, where my dad was a church administrator back in 1999, was really one of the first mass church shootings in America's history. And since then, there have been far too many of them. And I think sometimes people ask, why would God allow churches to be shot up like that? Why would he allow those kinds of tragedies to happen at a church? And I think really kind of what you're saying when you ask something like that is that, church is a place for good people to go. Why would good people get shot up? And in reality, I think that the answer to that is just simply that bad things happen. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. And so asking why shootings happen at a church is really no different than asking why shootings happen at all in the first place, because not that anybody's good, since churches are supposed to be hospitals for hurting and broken people, very often hurting and broken people show up there. And sometimes that goes badly, even though churches are there to help.
My name is Chief James Kruger. I'm the Chief of Police of the Oak Brook Police Department. I've been here almost 8 years. I've been a police chief for nearly 15 years, and I've been in law enforcement almost 40 years. Really, the whole outlook of security, and especially in a church environment or a soft target environment, has changed so much over the last several years. I can recall maybe 10 or 20 years ago when we first talked about church security. Basically that meant helping with traffic control and maybe helping make sure the collection stayed safe, at the end of the service. But now things have changed so much, especially after 9/11, where we look at it completely differently. When you think about the shooting that happened in Colorado Springs about 15 years ago or so, and then you have Charlottesville, and then you have the one in Texas, is that we really look at these things much differently. And I think part of it is mindset. Our staff and law enforcement agencies all over are ready to assist churches with their security and their safety teams. But I think there was really a training and mindset change that had to occur with some of these folks, because obviously when somebody comes to church, they're thinking differently as far as caring about other people and having that mindset that they want to be a helper and not so much looking at any potential threats, and also be so much more welcoming, right? Of all walks of life. And what we want to do is be able to complement that and keep it a safe environment and work with the team that's on the ground at the church, and not take away from why the church members are there to worship in peace.
A man entered into the church, and I was on the pulpit at the time, and I was speaking about the love of Christ and how this nation needed to learn how to abide in Christ as a nation. And we were talking about things like that and dialoguing. And I saw this man come into the back of the church, and he looked extremely frustrated. And he just began to pace back and forth in the back of this church. And I didn't quite know what was going on. I felt like I was in another nation, even though I was also with other pastors from other nations. I felt like, in other nations, someone who's preaching sees that, they may stop. They may go and deal with that and minister to that individual, then go back to preaching. And I thought, wow, is this going to happen in the United States? Is this going to happen in Tampa like that? Instead, what I did is I looked and I caught my eyes on my friend from Uganda. He was a pastor from Uganda that was with me. And I stared at him for a while, then he caught my eyes, and then I looked to the back. And he looked to the back, and he saw this man. Well, he immediately went to his knees and just begun to pray. That's really what he did. And then I looked to another pastor, and I looked to the Nigerian pastor, this is his church. And I looked at him, and he said, okay, what's going on? And I looked to the back, I kind of nodded my head, and he looked up, and he saw this man who was just, looked like a caged animal, really. I mean, he was frustrated. He was walking very vigorously, back and forth, like something was really wrong. So the pastor actually got some of his ushers, and they went back to this man. And as they went back to this man, it was very interesting that they began to dialogue with him. Now, we continued what we were doing, so I didn't know what that dialogue was until later on. And as it came out to be, this man was actually a jihadi. And he was activated through the mosque, a mosque there in Tampa. And that's what we found out later on. And so he had come to the church really to kill whoever was speaking and as many people as he could. And he had a weapon on him. But every time he would go and try to take that weapon out, he couldn't do it. Now, this is a man who we later found out trained as one to do such a thing since he was 10 years old. So that the guys go back there and they speak to him and they actually lead him to the Lord. So this man winds up being shared the gospel. He never pulled his gun out. He wasn't able to. Police are called. Other people are notified, including the FBI. And he says, I don't know what happened. I don't know why I couldn't do it. It's like every time he went to do it, he couldn't do it. He was stopped. That night, that man not only gave his heart to the Lord, but there was another very zealous pastor that was there. And he said, why don't we baptize him tonight? I mean, if this is going the way it is, let's go ahead and baptize him. The police really couldn't arrest him because he didn't do really much. He didn't do anything wrong except pace around the floor in the church. But he told the story, what he came to do. And this man wound up being born again, winds up, hearing the gospel. And not only that, he gets baptized that night. And of course, because of that, those who sent him now wanted to kill him. So he winds up in a witness protection program. Maybe 4 days later, I see the story in the news, and someone tells me this and says, what you're seeing in the news is that someone shared information with authorities that there was going to be a suicide bomber in Fort Lauderdale Beach. That made national news. Why were we spared? Why were we spared in this? And really, is that the crest of the story? And I've begun to realize that is not even the pinnacle of this story. The pinnacle of the story is that we knew where we were going had he chose to shoot us. We were all those who are in Christ, and we would have obviously, to be absent from the bodies, to be in the presence of God, that's where we would have been. But this man was a jihadi. This man trained since he was 10 years old. And in that moment of time, when he walked into the presence of God, because the prayer of the people were there and they were abiding in Christ, Christ arrests this man's heart. And he was unable to do what he came to do.
So in this case, the man was confronted by the Spirit of God, really, when he entered that church and ended up giving his life over to Jesus. And that you couldn't hope for a better outcome than that. But it doesn't always go that way. The church shooting that took place in Sutherland Springs, Texas, killed 26 people. And I just wanted to show this little clip from Stephen Williford, the man who stopped that shooter.
My daughter came into the bedroom and she said, Dad, there's a man in black tactical gear shooting up the Baptist church. Every one of those shots to me represented one of my neighbors, one of my friends. And I ran as fast as I could. Immediately, he came out of the church shooting at me. He hit the truck in front of me, hit the car behind me, hit the house behind me. And I hit him. He had an AR-15, but so did I. And it's not the gun, it's the heart. It's a matter of the heart. I'm not the bravest man in the world or anything, but I was here. I was here, and I could do something. And I had to do something.
So circling back around to Wedgwood Baptist Church, the shooting that happened there in 1999, where my dad was present, the guy actually shot at my dad a couple times and fortunately missed. But there's a really great little documentary made about the 20th anniversary by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And I just wanted to play an excerpt of that for you because there's some very powerful points made, especially by the pastor, Al Meredith. Listen to this.
You had Columbine 5 months earlier, and you had a number of schools where shootings took place. But I think ours was the first church as far as mass shooting.
On that night, we saw the darkness come in, guns blazing to kill, harm, and destroy as many people as it could.
The lives that were changed and affected, God had a plan for their lives, and their lives were touched in such a way that their lives still go on. Even those who died at this scene, their lives still go on. They live in me. I walk out every day of my life and I see the memorial out here with all the 7 faces. I live with them every day.
The people I know about the church as a whole, it strengthened our faith because the Prince of Darkness threw his biggest haymaker at us that you can't even imagine. And it just drew us closer to God and closer to one another. Where else do you turn when life falls apart? You got no other answers. There's nowhere else to go.
So, I think the bottom line is we don't know if God's going to allow a tragedy like that to take place in our church or not, but we are we have a duty of care to the people in our church to do everything we can to try to make them safe with God's help. And we have to understand that grace to be prepared comes from God. But also, if a tragedy does occur, we have to be able to trust God that He can bring order out of chaos. He can bring good out of bad. He can bring powerful testimonies that will glorify Him, even out of the worst tragedy. And in reality, I think when we get to heaven and we see things from His point of view, we're going to realize that there really was no such thing as a tragedy here on earth, because that He was able to turn it for our good, and even for the good of the people who died. So I know that's hard question to kind of wrestle with, but I think it's worth wrestling with it. And I pray that you can find an answer that is acceptable to you, and that you also will trust God with your life and with your future, because I don't know how people make it if they don't.